December 7th, 1941, a Sunday. The water at Pearl Harbor is burning. 200 miles to the west, a carrier cuts through empty ocean. She's late. Delayed by weather, by a storm that slowed her aircraft delivery mission just enough to matter. Her pilots are restless. Her captain keeps checking the clock. They should have been home by now. At 07:58, the radio fills with noise, fragments, shouting. The words don't make sense at first. Then they do. Pearl Harbor is under attack. The USS Enterprise launches aircraft into the chaos. Some of her pilots arrive over Oahu in time to see the second wave. A few are shot down by friendly fire. American gunners too panic to check their targets. Others chase Japanese planes out to sea. They find nothing. By nightfall, the Enterprise is hunting for an enemy fleet that has already vanished. This is how her war begins. Too late for the first fight, just in time for every fight after. Over the next 4 years, the Enterprise will earn 20 battle stars, more than any ship in American history. She will be reported sunk by the Japanese 3 times. Each time she will reappear. They will call her the Gray Ghost, the carrier that cannot be killed. But that's the legend. This is the story underneath. The fires, the flooding, the men who didn't come home, the patches welded over wounds that never fully healed, and the question that history still hasn't answered. What do you owe a ship that gave everything? And what does it mean that America couldn't find a way to save her? She was born in a shipyard in Newport News, Virginia, 1934. The Depression was grinding on year after year, and men lined up for any work they could find. Building a warship meant steady pay for years. It meant feeding your family. It meant something to do with your hands besides weight. The yards stretched along the James River, a forest of cranes and scaffolding rising from the water's edge. The smell hit you first, hot metal, oil, the sulfur stink of welding, then the noise, hammers ringing against steel plate, the stutter of rivet guns, the roar of furnaces heating metal until it glowed orange and could be shaped. Men shouted over the din, their voices lost in the industrial thunder. The keel was laid on July 16, 1934, just a spine at first, a steel backbone running the length of what would become the ship. Then the ribs rose, curved frames welded into place one by one. Then the skin, plates of steel, each one hoisted by crane, positioned by hand, and fastened with rivets driven hot. The riveters worked in teams. One man held the rivet in place with a bucking bar. Another drove it home with a pneumatic hammer. The rhythm was constant, a mechanical heartbeat that echoed across the yard from dawn until dark. A good team could drive 200 rivets an hour. A mistake could cost a finger, or worse. Welders worked in heat that soaked through leather gloves and heavy aprons. The arc light was blinding. They wore dark masks that turned the world into shadows and fire. Sparks showered down, catching on clothes, burning through to skin. The men kept working. They learned not to flinch, thousands of them, laboring in shifts around the clock, shaping something that would outlast most of them. They didn't know they were building history. They knew they were building a paycheck. That was enough. The Enterprise was a Yorktown-class carrier, the second of her kind, 809 feet long, nearly 3 football fields, displacement of 19,800 tons standard, over 25,000 fully loaded, a flight deck that stretched 802 feet, wooden planking over steel, designed to absorb the shock of landing aircraft. Below that deck, a hangar bay where planes could be stored, armed, and serviced. And below that, a floating city. The engine room sat deep in the hull, 60 feet below the waterline. 4 Parsons geared steam turbines, fed by 9 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, generating 120,000 shaft horsepower. Enough power to drive the ship at nearly 33 knots, faster than most cruisers, fast enough to outrun a submarine on the surface. The men who worked those engine rooms did so in temperatures that climbed past 120 degrees. They stripped to undershirts and shorts. They drank salt tablets by the handful to replace what they sweated out. When the ship went to battle stations, they sealed themselves inside and waited. If a torpedo found them, there would be no escape. The hatches were dogged shut to preserve watertight integrity. The men below decks understood the math. Their lives weighed less than the ship's survival. Elsewhere, the infrastructure that kept 3,000 men alive and fighting. Galleys that served meals around the clock. Breakfast at 0600, lunch at 11:30, dinner at 1700, and a midnight meal for the watch crews. Bakers working through the night to have fresh bread by morning. Butchers breaking down sides of beef in the freezer compartments. Cooks preparing food in steam and heat, feeding an appetite that never stopped. Machine shops where machinists' mates could fabricate replacement parts from raw stock. Sick bays where pharmacists' mates stitched wounds and treated fevers. A dental office. A print shop for producing the ship's daily newspaper. Berthing compartments where sailors slept in racks stacked 3 high, so close they could hear each other breathe. And everywhere, the systems no one saw. Miles of electrical wiring, carrying power to lights, to gun directors, to the radar sets that would later be installed. Steam pipes that could scald a man to the bone if a fitting failed. Fuel lines running aviation gasoline. Avgas, the most dangerous substance aboard, from storage tanks deep in the hull to the flight deck above. The Navy called carriers floating bombs and meant it literally. A single spark in the wrong place could turn the ship into an inferno. The men who served on carriers learned to respect fire the way sailors had once respected drowning. She was commissioned on May 12, 1938. The ceremony was brief and formal. Dignitaries spoke about strength and readiness. The crew stood at attention in dress whites. Captain Newton H. White read his orders and assumed command. The band played. The flag rose. In the photographs, everyone is smiling, shading their eyes against the Virginia sun. No one knew what was coming. No one could have known. The treaties that were supposed to prevent another war were already failing. Germany was rearming. Japan was conquering. But on that May afternoon, with the James River glittering behind her, the Enterprise was just a new ship joining the fleet. Her war was 3.5 years away. She would spend those years training, and the training would save her. The years before Pearl Harbor were a rehearsal no one recognized. The Enterprise operated in the Pacific, running exercises, working out the procedures that peacetime navies use to prepare for wars they hope won't come, launching aircraft, recovering aircraft, learning what happened when both occurred simultaneously, with planes in the air low on fuel and planes on deck armed and fueled and waiting. The choreography of the flight deck was lethal in its complexity. A plane comes in too fast, misses the arresting wire, slams into the barrier. A plane comes in too slow, stalls, drops into the water off the stern. A pilot misjudges the approach, drifts left, clips the island with a wingtip. Crashes happened regularly. Men died regularly. The Navy logged the incidents, adjusted procedures, and kept going. Carrier aviation was dangerous in peacetime. Everyone accepted the cost. The question was whether it could win a war. Below decks, damage control parties drilled on scenarios they hoped would stay imaginary. Fire in the hangar bay, flooding in the forward compartments, a bomb hit on the flight deck. They practiced until the responses were automatic. Grab a hose, grab a shoring timber, seal the hatch, stop the flooding, stop the fire, keep the ship alive. The men grumbled about the drills. The drills would save them. By late 1941, tension in the Pacific had been building for years. Japan had invaded China. The United States had imposed embargoes. Diplomats exchanged notes that changed nothing. The Enterprise was one of 3 carriers in the Pacific Fleet. The others were Lexington and Saratoga. The battleships moored at Pearl Harbor were considered the fleet's backbone. The carriers were something new, still proving themselves. History would render its verdict soon enough. On November 28, 1941, the Enterprise departed Pearl Harbor with a load of Marine fighter aircraft bound for Wake Island. A routine ferry mission, she should have returned by December 6th. The storm changed that. Heavy seas, headwinds that slowed the destroyers in her escort. Refueling at sea became dangerous, then impossible. Vice Admiral William Halsey, commanding the task force, faced a choice: push through and risk losing a destroyer, or slow down and accept the delay. He slowed down. December 6th became December 7th. The Enterprise was still 200 miles out when the first bombs fell on Battleship Row. Luck. That's the word that gets used. The carriers were lucky to be at sea. If the Japanese had caught them at anchor, they would have burned alongside the battleships. The Pacific War might have lasted another year, or ended differently altogether. Instead, the carriers survived. The Enterprise survived. Luck is a strange word for what followed. 4 years of combat, 20 battle stars, thousands of men killed or wounded. The ship hit, burned, holed, and patched so many times that by 1945 she was more scar tissue than original steel. If that's luck, it comes with a cost the Navy never printed on the citations. February 1942. The war was 2 months old. The news from the Pacific was a catalog of disasters. Wake Island had fallen, Guam was gone. The Philippines were dying slowly. MacArthur's forces pushed back toward Bataan. The Japanese seemed unstoppable, their forces sweeping south toward Australia, west toward India. The Enterprise struck back. On February 1st, Halsey took the task force into the Marshall Islands, Japanese territory fortified and defended. The target was Kwajalein Atoll, the enemy's eastern anchor. The mission was simple: hit them. Show Tokyo that the Pacific Fleet was still fighting. The attack was modest by the standards of what came later. Dive bombers struck shore installations. Fighters strafed airfields. A few ships were damaged in the lagoon. The strategic impact was negligible. The psychological impact was not. The United States had attacked. After 2 months of retreat and loss, someone had punched back. Newspapers ran the story on front pages across the country. Halsey became famous overnight. Bull Halsey, the admiral who fights. The Enterprise disappeared back into the Pacific, hunting for more targets. She raided Marcus Island in March, Wake Island in February. Small operations. The Navy was buying time, keeping the enemy off balance while the shipyards built the fleet that would eventually win the war. Then came April. Then came Doolittle. The plan was insane by every conventional measure. 16 Army B-25 bombers, land-based aircraft never designed for carrier operations, would launch from the deck of the Hornet, fly 600 miles to Japan, bomb Tokyo and other cities, and then continue on to China because they couldn't land back on the carrier. It was a one-way mission. Everyone understood that. The Enterprise's job was escort. She would shepherd the Hornet close enough to launch, provide air cover, and get both carriers home. On April 18, 1942, the bombers lifted off. One by one, engines straining, they clawed into the air from a deck that wasn't long enough for the weight they carried. Every pilot knew the math was wrong. They went anyway. The bombs that fell on Tokyo did little damage: a few factories, a few houses. The strategic effect was almost zero. The message was different. Japan could be reached. The home islands were not safe. The Emperor himself could hear American engines overhead. The raid changed the war's psychology. It did something else too. It pushed the Japanese into the operation that would break their offensive power forever. They decided to extend their perimeter, to take Midway Island, and draw the American carriers into a decisive battle. They got their battle. They lost it. June 4th, 1942. The morning sky over Midway is pale and cloudless. The Japanese strike force is 200 miles northwest. 4 fleet carriers, the best in the Imperial Navy, carrying the pilots who had devastated Pearl Harbor. The Americans are waiting. Code breakers have cracked the Japanese naval cipher. Admiral Nimitz knows what's coming, knows where, knows approximately when. He has sent everything he can spare: the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown. The last one rushed out of dry dock with battle damage still unrepaired. 3 carriers against 4. The math looks bad, but the Japanese don't know the Americans are there. At 04:30, the Japanese launch their first strike against Midway Island itself. The attack is effective. Installations burn. Marines die in their positions. But the island's aircraft, the bombers and torpedo planes based on that tiny spit of coral, have already launched. They find the Japanese fleet and attack. They are slaughtered. Torpedo bombers without fighter escort, obsolete aircraft flown by brave men into a wall of anti-aircraft fire, and 0 fighters. Almost none of them score hits. Almost none of them survive. But they do something. They pull the Japanese combat air patrol down to low altitude, chasing targets, burning fuel. The flight decks of the Japanese carriers are chaos. Aircraft returning from Midway need to land. Aircraft being rearmed for a second strike need to launch. Bombs and torpedoes are being switched as orders change. Fuel lines are running. Ordnance is stacked on deck. At 10:22, the dive bombers from the Enterprise arrive overhead. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey has been searching for an hour, fuel running low, following a hunch that took him north. He finds the Japanese by following a destroyer that was racing to catch up with the fleet. Below him, the carriers are turning into the wind to launch. Their decks are packed with aircraft. Their fighters are at sea level. McCluskey pushes over. His pilots follow. In the next 6 minutes, the war in the Pacific changes. 3 Japanese carriers are burning. Kaga takes 4 direct hits, her flight deck torn open, aviation fuel igniting in sheets of flame. Akagi takes 1 bomb that detonates among the armed aircraft on her hangar deck. The chain reaction is immediate and unsurvivable. Soryu takes 3 hits and becomes an inferno within minutes. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, survives long enough to launch a counterstrike. Her bombers find the Yorktown and cripple her with 3 bomb hits. Japanese torpedo planes come next and put 2 more into her hull. The Yorktown goes dead in the water, listing, burning. But the Enterprise's pilots find the Hiryu that afternoon. 4 bombs. The last Japanese carrier at Midway begins to burn. By nightfall, it's over. 4 Japanese fleet carriers sunk. The pilots who had attacked Pearl Harbor, who had swept across the Pacific, are dead or floating in oil-slicked water waiting for rescue that won't come. Japanese naval aviation will never fully recover. The Enterprise survived Midway without a scratch. Her air group did not. Torpedo Squadron 6 launched 14 aircraft that morning. 10 were shot down. Most of the crews were never recovered. The water was warm. It didn't matter if no one could find you. The men who returned landed on a flight deck that felt wrong. Too quiet. Too many empty bunks in the ready rooms. Too many faces that would never appear at mess again. Victory. That's what the Navy called it. The men who flew from the Enterprise counted it differently. They counted the empty chairs. They counted the letters that would have to be written. They counted the friends they would never see again. This is what battle stars leave out. The next 2 years were attrition. The Pacific War became a grinding advance, island by island, sea by sea. The Enterprise was there for almost every major engagement. Eastern Solomons, August 1942. The Japanese sent a carrier force south to contest Guadalcanal. The Enterprise's air group found them first, crippling the light carrier Ryujo. But the Japanese found the Enterprise too. 3 bombs hit her flight deck. 1 penetrated to the 3rd deck before exploding. The fires burned for hours. 74 men died. Damage control parties worked through the smoke and heat, dragging hoses into spaces where the air itself seemed to burn. They sealed compartments that were flooding, shored bulkheads that were buckling, fought the ship's wounds with timber and muscle and will. Within an hour of the last bomb hit, the Enterprise was launching aircraft again. That became the pattern. Hit, hurt, repair, fight, take another hit. Santa Cruz, October 1942. The Japanese caught the Enterprise with a coordinated strike. 2 bombs punched through the flight deck. A third detonated near the bow, buckling plates, starting fires that spread through the forward compartments. A Japanese plane, damaged and burning, dove into the ship's side. One of the first kamikaze attacks of the war, though no one called it that yet. Below decks, the scene was chaos. Smoke so thick you couldn't see your hand. Heat that blistered paint off the bulkheads. Men crawling on hands and knees because the air near the deck was marginally cooler, marginally more breathable. The damage control parties moved toward the fire, not away from it. That was their job. That was what the drills had prepared them for. They saved the ship. They always saved the ship. The Enterprise limped to Noumea for repairs. Her flight deck was torn open, her bow crumpled, her hull streaked with scorch marks and salt. The repair crews worked around the clock for 2 weeks. They patched what could be patched, welded what could be welded, and got her back to sea. The Japanese reported her sunk. She would be reported sunk twice more before the war ended. Tokyo Rose announced her death to American troops across the Pacific. Each time, the men on the Enterprise listened, laughed grimly, and went back to work. The gray ghost, the carrier that could not be killed. But a ship is not a ghost. A ship is steel and rivets and welds, and steel accumulates damage that repairs can only mask. Every shock weakens a frame. Every fire warps a plate. Every patch covers a wound that never fully heals. By 1944, the Enterprise was held together as much by the stubbornness of her crew as by the integrity of her structure. And the crew kept changing. Sailors rotated home. New men came aboard. The ship was continuous, but the people inside her were not. A machinist's mate who had served at Midway might be gone by the Philippine Sea. The gunner who replaced him wouldn't know the stories, wouldn't understand the weight of the name he now carried. The ship remembered. The men forgot, or tried to. The final year of the war brought the largest naval battles in history, and the strangest. Philippine Sea, June 1944. The Japanese sent 9 carriers against the American fleet, trying to break the invasion of the Mariana Islands. American submarines found them first and sank 2. American fighters did the rest. The Japanese lost nearly 400 aircraft in a single day. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the pilots called it afterward. The Enterprise's air group claimed dozens of kills. The victory was so lopsided it felt wrong. The Japanese pilots were green, their training programs gutted by 3 years of attrition. They flew into American fighters and American flak and died in numbers that made even the victors uneasy. Then Leyte Gulf, October 1944. 4 separate engagements across 3 days. The Japanese threw everything they had left, including, for the first time, organized kamikaze units. The Enterprise wasn't hit at Leyte. Others were. The escort carriers off Samar, caught by Japanese battleships that should have been nowhere near them, fought a desperate action that defied every tactical principle. The light carrier Princeton took a bomb that found her torpedo storage. The explosion killed hundreds. Ships burned across 100 miles of ocean. The kamikazes were something new, not desperate pilots crashing damaged planes. That had happened before. This was doctrine. Young men taking off with just enough fuel for a one-way trip, aiming their aircraft at the biggest ship they could find. The Americans didn't know how to process it. They still don't. Okinawa, spring of 1945. The invasion of Japan's inner defensive ring? The Kamikazes came in waves. The Enterprise operated as a night fighter carrier, her pilots launching in darkness to intercept incoming raids. The work was exhausting. Pilots flew until their vision blurred and their hands shook on the stick. Deck crews worked around the clock, arming and fueling and launching in a rhythm that never stopped. On May 14, 1945, a kamikaze found the Enterprise. The plane came in low, under the radar, invisible until it was too late. It struck the forward elevator, the platform that carried aircraft between the hangar deck and the flight deck. The impact drove the elevator down. The explosion blew it up. 400 feet into the air, a 20-ton slab of steel tumbling end over end against the morning sky. 14 men died. The forward flight deck was destroyed. Fires burned through the compartments below. She survived. Of course, she survived. But this time the damage was too severe for another 2-week patch job. The Enterprise turned east and sailed for Puget Sound for a full shipyard overhaul. The war ended while she was still in the yard. 20 battle stars. Every major engagement from Pearl Harbor to Okinawa. More combat than any carrier in American history. She had given everything she had. What would America give in return? The answer came slowly, and it came wrong. After the war, the Enterprise was decommissioned. This was expected. The Navy had more carriers than it needed, and newer ones were already building. The Enterprise was tired. Her hull had taken shocks that no inspection could fully measure. Her systems were a generation old. Keeping her operational would cost more than building something new. She was placed in reserve at Bayonne, New Jersey, mothballed. Her guns were coated in preservative. Her machinery was sealed against corrosion. She joined dozens of other ships in the same silent rows, vessels that had won a war and now waited to learn their fates. The campaign to save her began almost immediately. The Enterprise Association, formed by men who had served on her, lobbied Congress for funds. They argued that the most decorated ship in American history deserved to be preserved as a museum. Other ships were being saved: the Missouri, where the surrender was signed; the Constitution, still afloat after 150 years. Why not the Enterprise? Money came from strange places. Veterans groups passed the hat. Civic organizations held fundraisers. School children sent pennies. The campaign was national news for a brief moment. Americans rallying to save a symbol of the war they had just won. But a carrier is not a frigate. The Enterprise displaced 25,000 tons. She needed constant maintenance just to stay afloat. Her pier fees alone would bankrupt most preservation organizations. No city wanted the liability. No state would underwrite the cost. The Navy said no. The ship was too large, too complex, too expensive. The Korean War had drained budgets. The Cold War demanded new construction, not old. Monuments. Sentiment was one thing. Arithmetic was another. In 1958, the Enterprise was sold for scrap. The winning bid came from the Lipset Corporation of New York. They paid $561,333.33, roughly $240 per ton, less than the price of scrap steel, less than the weight of the war she had carried. The shipbreakers towed her to Kearny, New Jersey, and tied her to a pier. The cutting began, torch by torch, plate by plate. The flight deck where 1,000 aircraft had landed. The island where Halsey had watched the war turn. The engine rooms where men had worked in killing heat to keep her moving. It took over a year. The men who had served on her didn't talk about it. Some drove to New Jersey and stood on the shore, watching the cranes swing and the torches flare. They didn't stay long. What was there to see? A ship being unmade. Steel being separated from steel. They had given everything. She had given everything. And in the end, none of it was enough. The gray ghost scattered, melted down and sold. Cars, maybe, refrigerators, rebar poured into highways. The ship that could not be killed rendered into metal that would rust and weather and fade. There's a lesson there, but it's not a comfortable one. Some things can't be saved. Some sacrifices don't get repaid. The country that asked everything of her decided, in the end, that keeping her wasn't worth the cost. The men who served on her understood. They understood better than anyone. They had learned during the war that nothing lasts. Not ships, not friends, not the certainty that tomorrow will come. They went home. They raised families. They built lives in the country they had fought to protect. And they carried the Enterprise with them. Not in steel, but in memory. In stories told to children and grandchildren. In reunions where the ranks grew thinner every year, there's a memorial now. A small one. At the Washington Navy Yard, a piece of the Enterprise's teak flight deck is preserved under glass. Most visitors walk past without seeing it. There's no museum, no guided tour, no gift shop selling replicas and postcards. The name lives on. The Navy has used it 6 times since, most famously for the nuclear carrier CV-65, which served for 50 years before her own decommissioning. Another Enterprise, CVN-80, is under construction now. The name still means something. The Navy knows what it carries. But the ship herself is gone. The men who served on her are almost gone now, too. The youngest sailors from 1945 are in their late 90s, the pilots who flew at Midway, the machinists' mates who kept the engines running, the damage control parties who ran toward fire, while everyone else ran away. Most of them have passed. Their children remember some of the stories. Their grandchildren have heard a few. Their great-grandchildren know the name, if they know anything at all. What survives? Not steel. Steel is temporary, no matter what we build, not even memory, which fades with each generation, until only the outlines remain. What survives is something harder to name. A principle, maybe. An example. That a thing can be broken again and again and still keep going. That the people who sustain it matter more than the thing itself. That luck is just another word for showing up, every time, no matter the cost, until the showing up becomes the story. The Enterprise showed up. Pearl Harbor, Midway, Santa Cruz, Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, Okinawa. When the war needed a carrier, she was there. When the bombs hit, she kept fighting. When Tokyo reported her sunk, she came back. She was not invincible. She was not magic. She was steel and systems, and 3,000 men who refused to let her die. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the only memorial that can't be scrapped. Not a ship, not a museum. Just the knowledge that once, when it mattered, she was there. And the men who sailed on her were there. And together, they held the line until the line didn't need holding anymore. The gray ghost. Gone now. But not forgotten. Not yet. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe. Your support makes these investigations possible. Tell me in the comments, which ship should we explore next? The Yorktown, lost at Midway. Her name resurrected 3 days later on a new hull? The Missouri, where the war ended and where the questions began? Or something forgotten? A ship no one's telling stories about anymore? These aren't just machines. They're the men who served on them. And every one of them cost something we're still counting.